Hey everybody, it's Dr. Tracy here for Kingdom Recovery just for today, and I'm just really excited. Just finished a Zoom meeting, and I thought I'd get on here online and just share some tidbits for those that might have missed that Zoom meeting today, and to help you in the process of recovery and share with you some of the things that we talked about today that might help some of you out there in the world of recovery. Remember that recovery is not just about drug addiction. Recovery, you might be recovering from divorce, you might be recovering from the loss of a loved one or the separation from someone that you care about. Could be the loss of your children, could be bankruptcy, could be any kind of recovery from any kind of addictive behavior, such as being a shopaholic, being an obsessive eater, being addicted to pornography, alcoholism, drug addiction. Your recovery could be any various kind of things. So when I talk about recovery just for today, it's talking about living in today in our recovery process and taking those steps according to God's kingdom principles. And so today I want to talk about a very important aspect of your recovery process. And it is this particular feature of recovery begins with and begins one way, and it takes shape into many different things. And I'm going to just keep my notes in front of me, so if I keep looking aside, just don't pay attention. I just want to make sure that I share this information with you. I hope you're doing good today, and I know that it's been difficult for a lot of people in this time of being sheltered. And one thing that people don't realize is they're experiencing grief, and I'm going to speak to that a little later today about, is grief hindering your recovery? I'll probably do it on my main page because I want it to be able to be shared on all my different pages to help people in grief recovery, people in my Paracletus counseling, as well as ministers around the world that are struggling. But we are suffering grief, and part of what we're grieving is the change in a familiar pattern of doing things. So I just want to welcome everybody that's joining in, and hopefully others will join us. And I just want to welcome you. I'm not going to take time to acknowledge every person, but I'm glad that you're coming on. And I'm just going to share for a brief few moments about a particular feature in a person's recovery that begins one way, and it evolves, and it takes different forms and different shapes throughout the process. And it's constantly changing shape based upon each and every individual's progress. Okay, so the tool of recovery that I'm speaking about is accountability. What is accountability? Well, first of all, accountability is a very necessary action to embrace when you are a person in recovery. No matter what that recovery is, it is important that recovering from anything, that you remain accountable. So accountability is a tool, and the definition of accountability is to allow yourself to be vulnerable to the point that you actually make yourself willing to be questioned and examined by other people. And it requires you to allow someone into your world, your whole world, and requires yourself to be expected to justify your actions and your decisions and prove that they are responsible actions and decisions. And, this is something, if you haven't been in other cultures and you've only been in American culture, that you may not have been exposed to from different perspectives. In my travels in other foreign countries and different cultures throughout the years, I've noticed that in many other cultures, accountability is something that is revered and respected and accepted widely by the population. But in America, we've been taught and been so ingrained with independence instead of interdependence. Another day, another topic. But a lot of times we are refusing many times to be accountable to other people. And I just want to welcome all those that are joining from all different places, from all over Georgia. And Pastor Nana, so good to see you on in London. And who knows who else will join us. But we are talking about an important tool of recovery. And that tool today, and the topic that we're talking about, is accountability. So, in other words, you're letting someone else become a sounding board, and you're answering to that someone else about why you're doing what you're doing in the moment. So, we call this technique thinking things through. And this also helps us with a very common characteristic in recovery of especially addiction or woundedness. So accountability forces a person to inspect their behaviors and to make sure that they're not making impulsive decisions or reactions instead of responses to a situation at hand. As you and I both know, we go through and experience several different situations in a day that we can react to instead of respond, or we can be emotionally attached to and find ourselves in impulsive behaviors. So this is why accountability is an important part of a person's recovery, because accountability helps you to reroute dysfunctional behaviors by redirecting and dissecting your motives behind what you're doing. So it's like by adding another person's perspective, it's like putting your situation under a microscope or putting it under a magnifying glass to determine why you're choosing to do what you do, why you're responding the way that you are or reacting the way that you are. And it also helps you not to continue cycles and to become more aware of the root causes of your decisions and choices. A lot of times, the decisions that you and I make, we make them from other root causes. And so accountability helps us to discern and to find out what are the root causes of the reasons why we do what we do, okay? And people repeat cycles. And so in order to stop repeating the cycles and begin to move farther on and grow beyond and evolve into all that God would have us to be as an individual, we have to somehow put our life under a microscopic or a magnifying glass to help us to understand that. So when we follow the process of accountability, it also helps us overcome anxieties and worry and other destructive forces and cycles that often hinder our recovery over and over. There are a lot of people in our group that have been clean before, or they've been free from addictive behaviors, or they've been free from dysfunctional behaviors, only to find themselves repeat those cycles again. Why do I know? Because some of those people on this page have confided that in me, that they are once again returning to a situation. I've also been a victim of those things in my own life and had to learn a skill of accountability to help me break cycles and break issues and break plagues in my life, okay? So even though there's accountability with courts sometimes, or there's accountabilities with like people in my program, they're under a director, maybe you have accountability to a boss about your performance on a job. There are also different levels of accountability with other people, whether it's a sponsor, whether it's a friend, whether it's a mentor, okay? Accountability allows a person to analyze and develop principles. To analyze means to look and delve into it deeper than what we see on the surface, and to develop a principle. A principle means like your form of beliefs, your core beliefs or values, the foundation on which you move from, your foundation of belief. And it also helps you with your chain of reasoning. So when we analyze and we begin to look at the principles, if we are a principled person or not, and what principles that we have are based on the foundation of our beliefs. And so accountability helps us to kind of delve into that and examine that. It not only helps us to develop our principles of life, but it helps us develop a character trait. Okay, so when we analyze and develop principles and character, then we will become aware of the reasons or the roots behind our decisions by answering to someone else for them. Who should be more established. So this person that we're answering to, this person that we're accountable to, or these individuals that we're accountable to, because we should really be accountable to more than one person. Because you might have a problem with infidelity, and you're gonna talk to someone and be accountable to someone who isn't, or who's had success over it. But then that person might be very poor when it comes to, they might be an alcoholic and they haven't grasped or overcome that area of their life. So you're not going to be accountable to them about your drinking problem, but you might be accountable to them about your relationship problem. So we will find accountability with different people in different situations, but whomever we become accountable to, we need to make sure that this person or this group of people have more established principles and character than us about that particular life event or skill or situation. So that's why it's very important when we look for a sponsor to find someone who has many more laps around the track than us. For example, you might be married 5 years. You have to learn that you shouldn't go to someone who's been married a year for advice or accountability. You shouldn't go to someone who's been married 5 to 7 years in the same time frame that you are, but you should go to someone who's been married 20 years, who has gone through and been around many more laps than you. Does that make sense to you? So when we have a relationship with a person who becomes our sounding board, that is, sometimes there's a question like, how could I have someone give me advice that's never been through what I'm through, or hasn't succeeded in what I'm trying to succeed in, or just has never experienced the same dysfunctional behaviors, or maybe the same activities such as drug use or gambling or pornography or whatever the thing is that you're recovering from. Well, one of the reasons it's good to have, even though we think that because they haven't experienced it, they can't relate to us, accountability and recovery isn't about who can relate to you, who's experienced it. Though sometimes those people can give us advice, it's more about having other perspectives. That's the key word. Someone that has not had the same experience of you, or who has overcome it many years prior to you, or hasn't been involved in that at all, can actually have a clearer perspective about and be able to see the reasons behind your behaviors, because they're not personally attached to that problem, or they're not emotionally attached to it. So true accountability takes a huge amount of humility on a person's part in order to really embrace it, and also a huge amount of trust. So two of the key things in order for us to really fully embrace accountability and allow it to help form and be used as a tool in our recovery is humility and trust. And those things become difficult. I was talking with one of the people in our group earlier in our Zoom meeting, and one of the things that they said is that they've discovered that part of the reason they have a hard time being accountable to authority is because in the past, in their experiences, people who've been in authority have abused that authority or have abused them with their authority. So that makes us a little gun shy of being accountable to somebody. But they've also learned that everybody's not the same, and just because one person has done that doesn't mean they could form that belief and foundational belief that no one in authority can be trusted. And so they had to restructure and redirect those thoughts and build on a better belief system that there are people you can trust, and there are people you can submit to and humble yourself to and remain teachable to. And it is okay to let people speak into your life, and not everyone wants to harm you. So let me pose this question to you. When someone asks you, why did you say something? Or they say, why did you do that? Do you become defensive and even angry or arrogant or prideful about that, or put that shield of protection up, like, how dare you ask me why I said that or why I did that? If we do, this generally means that we are struggling with our ability to come under someone else's authority or tutorage. And without willingness to allow yourself to be corrected and allow yourself to be vulnerable or guided, or even by someone giving you an opinion different than yours, means that you are not ready to submit to God's way of authority. A very good chapter in the Bible that would help you learn about God's kingdom principles, foundational truths for you to build your life on regarding authority is in Romans chapter 13. And another place that you can look at in Scripture is Proverbs chapter 4, where it talks about wisdom, because wisdom is applying the things that you know. And sometimes that means that you have to apply things regardless of your feelings about them, regardless of your fears and those things. And then when we apply wisdom or use wisdom and apply the knowledge that we have gained from something, regardless of our feelings and our emotions, then we can be more in God's way of doing things when it comes to our recovery and when it comes to accountability. Because remember, we are talking about kingdom recovery just for today, right? So oftentimes we connect only with people who think like us, believe like us, would respond like us, or people who will tell us not necessarily what they think and not necessarily what we need to hear, but just what they think we want to hear. And I call those yes men. That's not a healthy way to live. Even though we think it's safer and we think it's better, it's actually not. Because when we form relationships only with people just like ourselves, and then later we wonder why we get stuck in the same cycle and we don't evolve out of situations and grow like we should expect to, the reason behind that is because we've surrounded ourselves with accountability people who think just like us and won't offer to us a different perspective. So you always have to look at that too, about when you're choosing who do I want to be accountable to, who can I trust, and who can I submit to, and what's their track record, and what kind of things can they bring to the table that can assist me to evolve and to grow in my process of recovery. It might be not always things that I want to hear, but the Bible tells us that better are the wounds of a friend than the kisses of a stranger. So sometimes we need to hear those things that we don't want to hear. Accountability and mentorship, they're very similar, but accountability is primarily to help us not repeat old patterns and to learn to think things through so that we can reach new disciplines and principles and gain stronger character traits. So maybe, I can share a couple of testimonies of things that people have done that have forced them to receive accountability. It might be that you were charged with something, or you received a traffic ticket, or you mishandled some funds and you were corrected, or your drawer was short on your job. And it's hard sometimes for us to be accountable to other people, but when we know that somebody's going to count our drawer, or we know that someone's going to hold us accountable for the speed that we choose to drive, and we're going to pay the consequences for the behaviors that we have if we don't, or if we have to answer to the courts for accountability, those kind of things help us to continue to keep on course and help us to look at life a little bit different. Accountability also protects us from our weakest links of ourself, or our weakest part of ourselves. So once we have a weakness of our own exposed, what would be an example? I remember an example of a lady that I was working with in an obesity support group. And she was sharing in her story that for the last 12 years, on her way to work every day, she was driving by a bakery and she was eating a dozen donuts in that 10 miles farther onto work every day, and she had never told anybody about it. And so when she disclosed that information in the group, someone said, Have you ever thought of driving a different way to work? Because you tell yourself every day that you're not going to stop, but you repeat that cycle over and over. So my suggestion would be to you, instead of beating yourself up and living in guilt and shame, now that you've exposed this secret about yourself, one of the good things that you could do is drive a different way to work. And it just seemed like such a simple thing. And but she came back the next week and she was just smiling from ear to ear, and she said, I've got a testimony. She said, I took Sally's advice and I decided to drive a different way to work. And do you know, after 12 years, I have not stopped at the bakery one time, and I've not eaten one donut all week long. And I feel like I have overcome something, but I've also decided to take her advice to never go that way to work again. And so she achieved success from sharing her secret, from trusting and being vulnerable, and someone saying to her, maybe if you quit putting the temptation in front of your face every day and you drove a different route, you might be able to beat this thing. She took that advice, she applied what she knew, and she had victory over a situation that she hadn't had victory over in 12 years. So sometimes when we remain accountable, it allows us to speak, and when we find that place of humility and trust, we can speak freely about our vulnerabilities, and it can shed light on how to change them in order to bring about results that we're really wanting to have. So one of the things that happens when you're in accountability and you find out a weakness, we don't need to carry shame in that, and we don't need to feel like we're a bad person, because when we're sharing that, what we're doing is we're closing a door in our life to a vulnerable place or a weakness in us by exposing it. Every time the enemy of our growth and our destiny is exposed, and we close that door and we put a lock on it, and we find a method and we find a principle to apply to our life, then we can evolve and we can grow into all that we desire to be. So one of the important things that you need to do before you enter into these relationships with someone regarding accountability is you need to ask yourself, where am I stuck and what am I not reaching over and over again? So maybe one of your weaknesses is that you tend to rush into long-term relationships too quickly. Or maybe you make life decisions quickly based on emotional events or moments. Maybe you trust people before you really know their character and their principles, and you get tangled up in a bad situation very quickly, but you don't know how to get back out from that toxic relationship or situation. When you have an accountability partner, you can discuss some of your plans prior to doing them. This is a very big key. You can say you're accountable all day long, but if you never talk to your accountability partner till after the fact of what you've done and the mess you find yourself in and you're trying to get out, then you're only halfway in with your accountability partner. Sometimes that accountability partner is someone that you should discuss what you're thinking about doing or how you're thinking about acting before you do it. And let them ask you well, why do you want to do that? What makes you think that that's the best route? We call that being the devil's advocate. What it is taking higher guidance and direction so that we can make a better decision, a quality decision, not an impulsive behavior, and we can think things through, as we call it, in recovery. So they might ask you the whys. They might ask you the what if this happened? Have you ever thought of this? Have you ever considered a different way of doing it? If you did, what would that be? And help you to process things. Okay, there's my word again about embracing the process of recovery. They may point out a decision that you're presently making is not based on a fact, but rather by the emotional effects caused by that stressful moment. Say that you're on a job and you have a boss who is verbally abusing you, always cutting you down, beating you down, and you no longer want to work for them because you can't even stand to go into your job. Okay, you make a decision that you're going to look for a job, and you share with your accountability partner, or you share with your mentor, hey, I'm going to look for a new job. I just can't work in this atmosphere anymore. And they might say to you, well, what kind of jobs are you going to apply for? If you get a job, how are you going to exit out of this situation? So you say to them, well, I'm going to exit out once I find a job. I'm not going to quit until I find a job. Once I find a job, I'm going to give a notice, whatever it might be for that particular kind of business that you work for, a week, 2 weeks, maybe 30 days, depending on the level of your responsibility. So you make this decision, you get a job, and you're supposed to start it, and you go to your present job, giving your notice, and you start working out your notice. Well, when you get to work one morning, your supervisor starts all over again, cutting you down and berating you, and you get angry, and they're angry because you've given them notice, and they continue to berate you. Your feelings get the best of you. You storm off the job, and you walk out, and then you call your accountability partner and tell them what happened. And they say this to you, well, why did you leave? You say, you know why I left. My supervisor was cussing me out and talking down to me again. And so your accountability partner might ask you, how often in the past has your supervisor done this? And you say to them, every single day I work. Okay, so it's really not anything different than what you've already been experiencing, correct? Yes, but I don't want to deal with this accountability anymore. I don't want to deal with this boss anymore. And so your accountability partner then might say to you, well, isn't that the same way they've always talked to you? And you say, yes, it's the same way they've always talked to me. Okay, so they proceed to tell you that you've made a poor decision, and you've already talked with your accountability partner that the way your boss is treating you is not healthy for you. We already know that. It's a given fact that you need to find another job. You found another job. You're working out your notice. So you have to learn how to stay the course based on not the present moment, not the present situation, but by the goals that you've set and the principles that you've decided to keep, and stay on track. Okay, so they proceed to tell you that you made a poor decision based on an emotional moment, and that you needed to return back into your job, asking your supervisor to forgive you for getting upset, and that it would be their decision whether you should leave or you should stay. But if you're going to stay, you're going to draw a new boundary that they will no longer be able to talk to you in such a manner, and they'll have to come at you correctly. So you're not giving them permission to continue to mistreat you, but you are going to stay under their authority to work out your shift or to work out your notice, but you are also going to set a line that they cannot cross if you're going to continue to work for them. So immediately when your accountability partner tells you this, you go street mode, and you tell your accountability partner that they don't understand and they don't get what you're going through. And so then what? Right here, you say this because, why do you say this? Because you know that this person, you've humbled yourself, you've been accountable to this person, but now you're in a moment, a heated moment of a situation going the exact opposite of what you wanted to, which is the exact reason why you have an accountability partner, because you've repeated cycles over and over. And so right now, you say you don't understand and you don't get where I'm coming from, so that you don't have to do what they're asking you to do, all because of one thing. You're still in your feelings. You're still in your emotions. That's part of the reason you need accountability partners, so that you don't continue to repeat the cycle of acting impulsively based on situations or emotions. So at this moment that I just explained, and those of you that are just joining, welcome to our talk about tools for recovery today on accountability. You can go back and review, but we're glad that you joined us right here. So at this moment, you have the opportunity to embrace the tool that's been given you called accountability. And you can either at this moment trust your accountability partner, whether it's your counselor, a director of a program, your boss, another supervisor on the shift with you, another coworker, your mother, or a peer support person, or someone else that you've given permission to speak into your life. So this is where your true recovery and the rubber of using a recovery tool, meet the road. You are now at a recovery crossroad, is what we call it. Right now, you have a choice to move outside of your own emotions, because remember, you're still caught up in your emotions, and you move according to the principles and the characters that are bigger than you at this moment, that your accountability partner has and is recommending. So in other words, you're using somebody else's brain and someone else's wholeness to make a better decision, to break a cycle from repeating in your life. Does that make sense to you? So when we do that, just a second, I lost my notes. We are making ourselves vulnerable, right? And remember, we talked about the definition of accountability is that we're being vulnerable to let someone examine and question our motives behind what we're doing. So now you're at this crossroads and you are deciding whether to go with the flow and go with what you're feeling, or to step outside of your feelings and trust right now someone who has the ability to see the situation, not connected to feelings, but is reasoning through, has thought it through, because they're not attached to it. Okay? And now you have to trust somebody else's decision rather than your own. Does that make sense to you? So that's the crossroad that we get to. And that's where accountability really makes or breaks us, okay? Because we want to have stronger discipline, stronger character. We want to have better principles. And we have just exposed one of our weakest links about ourselves, okay? So now it's time for trust to kick in. That's the difficult part of our recovery, is that we've got to allow trusting someone else's advice over our own feelings, okay? So let's continue here. At this moment, we have the ability to embrace that tool, okay? And we're going to make that choice to move outside of it. So we're about to actually make a decision based on someone else's principles and characters rather than our own. That takes a lot of trust, right? And I'm sure you have other examples, and maybe you can comment some in the place below about how you didn't allow accountability you didn't embrace accountability in that moment. When we don't embrace accountability at this moment, this crossroads, when we are in emotional high, or we are in a situation that's bigger than us and bigger than our principles, bigger than our character, that's when we repeat cycles, okay? So keep using the word accountability partner, because even if you don't want to have accountability from someone, for example, a parole officer, a drug court director, or a boss that has not treated you properly, these people are partnering with you in your recovery, and they're trying to help you manage something you have not otherwise been able to manage in the past. Might be drinking, might be promiscuous relationships, might be pornography, might be gambling, it might be infidelity, could be any kind of different thing that's happening. So you've got to get to that place where you recognize that some things are bigger than you. And if you don't embrace accountability with another person who's had success in an area, or can see it from a perspective that is detached from emotions, then you won't be able to break those cycles, and you'll keep repeating things. And 30 years from now, you'll still be watching programs like this, trying to figure out why you can't overcome the same obstacles over and over. So we've got to understand that, okay? So the last thing I want to say, because we just have a few minutes left, but we always want to remember that accountability is a very important tool of recovery, on the road to recovery, and we should embrace it. And in order to embrace it, we're going to have to be vulnerable, we're going to have to be humble, we're going to have to be teachable. And we're going to have to recognize that someone doesn't have to always experience the same thing as us to be able to speak to us. Sometimes they can speak to us from a better perspective if they haven't gone through the same experiences. But they can also help us to put under a microscope or under a magnifying glass this particular thing, and we can begin to find the roots or the patterns that we repeat over and over, and where they come from, where they're rooted, whether they're rooted in fear, whether they're rooted in anxiety, whether they're rooted in self-worth. Maybe they're rooted in, as the young lady was sharing today about accountability to authority from past experience with other people in authority. So whatever the situation is, accountability is a tool of recovery that you can't succeed without. And when you start letting your guard down, when you start letting go of those people that you've allowed to speak into your life, and you leave yourself isolated and on an island, that's when you become prey to the enemy to take you out. Because when you are uncovered and when you are unattached to anybody else and you become isolated, there is a place where you can become prideful to think you don't need other people to speak into your life, or you can also become entrapped in thoughts and cycles and patterns that are not healthy for you. So I just want to encourage you as I close today, get some accountability. Find someone to be accountable to for whatever area of your life that you're recovering from. Maybe you just are battling cycles of depression because you've gone through divorce, or you're battling being a shopaholic and not managing your money well. Maybe you're not managing your diet well. Whatever your addictive behavior might be, or compulsive behavior might be, or dysfunctional behavior might be. And dysfunction is just this, things out of order. And when you begin to evaluate those things and you say, man, I need somebody to be accountable to, look for someone that's not younger or weaker in it than you, or below you in success, don't have as many notches in their belt as you. Don't go to someone who's an equal with you, but go to someone who's succeeded beyond you, because we always vent up, not across and not down, or we always become vulnerable to people who are more mature than us, or people who have achieved more than us in a specific area, or just have a clearer head about some things. So hopefully this has helped you, and I want to remind you that Kingdom Recovery, just for today, is God's way of doing things, and you can recover everything the enemy's ever stolen. You're able to recover, but you've got to apply the principles and the character and the nature of God in order to have that. So just for today, I pray that you will stay clean, stay sober, stay free from depression, oppression, any kind of compulsive behavior by doing the next right thing. And today, grab an accountability partner and recognize that sometimes you've got to have other people speak into your life, and understand that it's a very important and powerful tool. And when you get to that crossroad where you've got to trade how you're feeling or what's going on with what someone's telling you that's bigger than you and outside of you. And when you do that, it's a powerful tool to take the roots out that have kept you bound. And I hope you'll embrace the process. God bless you. Have a godly day. Glad you joined us today. Share this with someone else.